Welcome back to Brandon's Book Club. Today, this is episode 3 of our discussion on Tress of the Emerald Sea. Today, we will be discussing part 5. And this section kicks off with learning about the rain, which I was so into because up to this point, I've been waiting for the rain to come because I've been waiting for fresh water. I've been wanting to know, like, okay, how are you drinking water? How are you alive right now? And I thought rain, like that's the fresh water. That's what it's going to be. In this section, he actually says wells, which cool. At least now we have an answer. And we also learned that rain is different here. So I love the way it's like you can kind of map it out. You can track the patterns and all that kind of stuff. But then in this area, it's actually no holds bar. We're all in danger here in the Crimson Sea. I know you had some interest in how that all worked as well.
So I hadn't even thought of water at all. Like they just had water. I didn't even think that like rain is problematic in this world. But I love the way that he does it with like, it's very trackable in the Emerald Sea, which makes it even more safe. You can go off of the charts that they had from 100 years ago and they're still relevant today. But in the Crimson, it just like snakes wherever it wants to. And I love what Hoyt says about the rain. He humanizes it and says that, or what's the term when they personifies it? Yeah. And says that like, it's not actually invested like in other places, but here and that day, I knew what I believed, like, cause it was going for them.
It was after
hard.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he captures her hopelessness so well here too, of just like, okay, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I didn't realize like how dumb was I to not even consider this thing that everybody avoids. I thought that I would be fine, but really it is down to luck. And that's a really hopeless feeling to actually have no control over your fate. And that's essentially what they're in right now. But also the imagery of like, you know, of them popping out. And it's just this spike coming out that's going to impale you.
Contrast between the vines, which still were very violent, but don't have quite the same violent imagery. Now we get the violent movement and imagery. So it's an interesting.
Yeah, the rain is so scary because it's not just wet, it's getting impaled through the chest, you know, like it's terrifying, honestly. And added with like the unpredictability that we were talking about, just like that you can't, for whatever reason, chart the rain over the Crimson Sea specifically, which is probably like, I mean, we don't get to see all 12 seas in the book, so maybe it's not the worst sea. 13 possibly. So maybe it's not the worst sea to have rain falling on you, but it kind of feels like the worst.
It's also the sea where things like to blow up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, which the vines were their own kind of horror, right? Like suffocating because it's growing out of your mouth. That's a shut steal. But this is also somehow scarier to me. Like even though it would be a faster death, it just feels more. It's more violent. Can't control. Yeah. Which we didn't talk about this, but there was a point where Tress did blow up her face. Which is like, okay, get one of those spores near your face. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like,
yeah, it's terrifying. I know you were really into the scene with the vines on the ship.
Definitely. Well, I think it's, you know, we've been seeing Tress studying and her ingenuity, and then to see it in action, I think was very satisfying. But the imagery of her throwing it down and getting the ship to rise above, it's just like, I'm a sucker for those moments. I like it when everyone like works together and it's, the plan works, and you know, and it's such an emotional moment. And it's also, I think, one of the first times, I don't know if it's the first time, but we get to see her working with the vines.
Being able to work, speak to them.
Speak to them, kind of make them grow, which is also a very evolving moment for us as readers with the spores, because again, they are frightening and terrifying, but she's kind of bringing, like the knowledge is reducing the fear, which I think is interesting.
It is very interesting. And we also get that with her learning about the weapons and learning about the flare that she's building and all that time that she pours over the papers and everything. I just love her mind. I love how she's slow to react and just wants to think through every action. And that's a big part of why her character is so successful, is because of that slow action or slow reaction to things.
She like takes the time to think about things and think things through. And it's really satisfying in this section in particular just to see like that payoff for her. Like that she can use the vines the way she does to save the ship, and that she can make the flare now too, using vines again. Like it's just so nice to see that like her like slow methodical work on like learning how to interact with the spores is actually going to like help her solve her problems, or hopefully help her solve her problems and at least save her friends when they all get almost impaled.
Which is a huge priority for her.
Yeah.
And I like with Tress herself, and we've known this from pretty much the beginning, but it's pointed out to us by Hoyt, is that at a certain point she learns something, and she does what like no other fantasy main character does. She says, I need to think about this more. And she sits down and she thinks about it instead of rushing head on to whatever it was. She really takes the time. She experiments with the verdant. She does her research. I mean, we don't see research very much in fantasy because it's kind of hard to do well.
Brandon does a lot of research.
But it's interesting because we as readers are interested how the spores work. And he makes that research a way that we can we like that research that she's doing. I like that Tress is that kind of person that will sit down, think about a problem, and then create a plan to execute it, even if that plan doesn't go well.
And it's and it's so nice that Tress is talented with the spores specifically. Like that's a nice like way for us to get to see all these things about the spores. I think it's something that's talked about in the book a few times, just like idea of like someone can have an affinity to something and then like never know that they have that affinity because like, let's say it's music and they never pick up an instrument or something. So it's like super satisfying to see Tress have this affinity, and we get to see her like realize that and actually like really enjoy it. Because I think like earlier in the book, she definitely has things she enjoys like baking and her cups and things like that. But this is like the first time like with the spores that she's like actively enjoying what she's doing, and like even though it's high stakes for her and she's stressed because like lives are on the line, if she can like make these spores do what she wants, she like enjoys the actual process of like learning and stuff.
It's also really satisfying because it's not like she just happens to be tremendously gifted. It's a matter of, I understand this, which reduces my fear of it, which means that I can have a relationship with it. So it doesn't just feel like, oh, okay, cool, neat. You're super skilled, like good job. It actually feels like something that feels really organic to the world, which is really nice.
I like this one because it's not the chosen one that just is really good at the magic, and so they're just natural at it. This is one where anyone could do it if they just took the time to learn about it. And those are some of my favorite kinds of magic, is anyone can do it, but the main character takes the time. Instead of this chosen one hero type.
And something that I really like that Tress discovers is how the vines can react to her in certain ways, and how she kind of like starts forming like that bond. Because in a way, it makes it so the verdant spores become less scary to me. And I think that might be part of the reason the Crimson Sea is so terrifying when we finally get to it, because the vines are terrifying when we first see them. But by the time we're in the Crimson Sea, we're like, oh, they're kind of like, I think there's like imagery where they almost like little puppies or something, like when she's like playing with them with her fingers or something. And so that like makes it way less scary.
And they don't respond to Huck.
No.
Yeah. So it's
just to Tress. So yeah, that kind of like makes those less scary. And then we go to this very terrifying sea. I don't think she can make Spikes be nice to her.
No.
Probably not.
Yeah. And we mentioned Hoyt. I also love, again, speaking of Tress and her intelligent mind, like her finding a way to make Hoyt tell her when he can't tell her, you know, like, okay, tell me a little bit about this part of the map. Okay, tell me a little bit about this part of the map. And then it's when he can't tell her a funny anecdote is when she's like, and now I know what we're doing.
There it is.
Yeah. I like the way she solves stuff like that. It's very, very good. Soleil, I know we wanted to talk about her a little bit. and her backstory. And as we learn more about her, that really endeared us to her a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Soleil has such an interesting character arc because her desperation is sort of what drives her to make choices that seem really weird.
Sure.
And it's even said in the book, like, that she's a poor judge of character, which I thought was a really interesting way to introduce a character. Like, this person's a poor judge of character. It's like saying, like, oh, this narrator is unreliable.
Yeah.
But she just does so many interesting things. I'm just intrigued by her, but it really makes sense when you get to know more of her story and the motivations behind why she makes the choices that she does. And you can kind of self-insert a little bit and go, yeah, I would probably do some pretty similar things if I was as desperate to take care of the people that I loved as she is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it really, once we get that story and we see that her motivation is so similar to Tress's, it really recontextualizes why she's clung so hard to this persona that she's forced on Tress. Which just like, oh man, that was my moment for her where I was like, oh, I want you to get everything that you need. You know, I want you to have your happily ever after. And I don't even like happily ever after.
Yeah, and I think she is a good foil for what Tress wants in the way that they're both kind of searching for the same thing. They're trying to rescue people. And I think it does also recontextualize the conversation with Tress and Charlie in the beginning about knights in shining armor and heroes and what they expect. Oh, I'd go save you. And the reality of what it means to try to save people that we love and how it's very different, obviously, for Soleil and what she's seeking. And so I think that is also plays very well together for the overall theme of the story.
To pick on you some more, we get to meet Zysis. What did we decide we were going to call him? What did you people tell us was wrong? Zysis?
You had the pronunciation, didn't you?
Well, my favorite pronunciation is
Okay.
No, we're not going to do that.
but I believe the audiobook says Zysis.
Zysis. Okay, so we finally get to meet Zysis. This is a pretty big scene. I'm going to let you run with that.
It's a big scene because people like dragons, so we can just keep it simple. But like, it's also a big scene wider Cosmere because if this is your first Sanderson, we have been teased with the talk of dragons for many, many books now. And so we know that there's dragons that exist. We haven't got to see them in the dragon form when we keep hearing about it. So to finally, it's like, oh, you told me there was going to be a dragon, and then we actually got to go see it and have art of the dragon.
I didn't think so. I was sure we weren't going to actually see it.
Yeah.
Really?
I was sure. I was like, we're not going to actually see the dragon.
Right, exactly. It was like, okay, cool. We're going to get sidetracked and do something else.
Yeah, Brandon always tells us there's a dragon. We're not gonna see it. And then we got to talk to
the dragon.
And he does that very thing in this book. Like, chapter 3 or 4, he says that Tress will go and fight a dragon, but we're not talking about that yet.
Exactly.
And we finally...
Yeah, he does say, this is the story where there will be a dragon. And I was still like, oh, yeah, sure.
Did you believe it?
I believed it, and I was so excited. So excited.
Yeah, and even though it was quick, it was like, I felt so satisfied.
I think that's a moment everyone loves in this.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the stuff with Tress and Crow was so funny.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to convince the dragon who's going to actually be the sacrifice.
It's like the Spider-Man pointing meme where they're like pointing at each other.
yeah.
Like, no, you're going to be a slave or whatever.
I love that it a little bit turned into like self-deprecation type of each other. Like Crow was trying to talk bad about herself.
Right, exactly. Like, no, you really want the other one, for real.
Oh, like, she's so much better than me.
Yeah.
I was reminded a little bit of like the Battle of Wits.
Yeah.
Just the back and forth becoming so ridiculous, and the dragon is just sitting there like, oh, please go on.
Right.
Oh, you might have your logic there. Maybe tweak that. Okay, now you.
Yeah, and then in the end, he's just like, all right, well, I've made my choice. It's just so simple. So Tress gets her boons, which again, it's like, Tress, you're here for Charlie, but she's thinking about everybody else.
Yeah.
Which, obviously that affects Charlie really strongly because I would think that she could have done something for herself to get Charlie, and she chose to say, I'll figure this one out. What they need matters more, which we didn't even talk about the fact that before all this, before we went and saw the dragon, free cannon guy.
Oh,
Laggart?
Laggard.
Laggard.
Laggart?
I love
threw me off a little.
Laggard.
Right.
Yeah.
So was it Laggard or was it Crow that actually shot Soleil in the leg?
That was Crow.
That was
shot.
Crow. Okay. Yeah. And broke the tablet. So that's why we needed that boon.
Yeah.
Which, man, I feel like that was the thing that Crow did that made me hate her more than anything else.
Yes.
Was breaking the
Honestly,
tablet.
yeah. I kind of felt like Hoyd exaggerated how bad she was throughout the book. Like it was a
Sure.
little too heavy-handed for me. Like it was like every opportunity Hoyd had would be like to say how like Crow has no soul or something
Right.
like
Yeah,
that.
she's
And
like
I'm
totally corrupted.
yeah, I'm like, okay, no.
Got it.
Yeah.
And
I'm
then
like,
she did that.
But then she did that, and I was like, okay, I buy it now. You know, I'm like, she's not redeemable, like, at all. That was like the moment. I was like, fine, Hoyd maybe is not exaggerating.
Right.
It is interesting how it's, I mean, obviously being shot makes you a bad person, shooting someone, but it's really taking away the communication device that feels so dark. There's something about
It's so
that.
personal.
Yes.
Yes, it's so targeted in a way that feels,
And unnecessary.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just cruel.
It's just to cause pain.
Yeah.
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 And I think with not to change the subject at
No,
all,
go.
but so Tress getting those boons, it shows the difference between her and Crow. Crow knew all of their ailments. I mean, I'm sure that Crow knew something was wrong with Anne, just not exactly what.
Sure.
She knew all of those ailments, and especially with what we were talking about with Soleil, the existence of Soleil's problem kind of foils Tress and Crow against each other. That Crow knew that she was trying to save her father and took her into the Crimson to pretty much die. Whereas Tress knew about it, and the first opportunity that she got, she tried to solve that problem.
Well, yeah. Well, in that scene previous that we were just talking about, Crow is actively harming each of her crew members in very personal ways.
She's incredibly manipulative.
She's horrible. And then in the very next breath, we see Tress actively trying to help them get what they need. Which I do think that there's more communication devices out there. Like there was a point where Fort docks on a deaf island and speaks to them with his hands. So we know that sign language is here, but like there's got to be more because some wizard did it. So there's got to be more wizards out there, you know?
I actually think the glasses was a very funny moment for me. Like it just, I don't know what I was expecting, but like you just can't see. That's your problem. And so
I didn't pick up on that either. I was just like, oh, she's a really bad shot.
That's what I thought too.
Because like you not being able to see has nothing to do with the fact that you're like shooting behind you. And that's even brought up in the book. But that was a cute little moment where I was like, oh, I didn't pick
It
that
does
up.
make sense though.
It
I mean,
does.
as a fellow glasses wearer, if you take your glasses off, it's like really hard to tell exactly. I don't know. When I take my glasses off and I see them, I'm like I gotta grab them, but I can't always get them right away. Does that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, my depth, like I have an astigmatism and my depth perception gets thrown off. And so like I go to reach for them and I'm like, oh, overshot that. We're gonna grab that.
When I think the other part, the backward shooting was explained, I think Hoyt says something like she also started getting it internalized. Like when you start internalizing everyone saying something about you, you also become it. So I think it was like
Yeah,
a
got in
dual
her
thing. So yeah, I thought it was sweet.
Yeah. All right. Best and worst of the section. I'm gonna go first. Dragon. Meeting Isis was so cool. Even though it was so brief, it was so satisfying in a Cosmere book to finally meet a dragon and wonder like, okay. So, I mean, okay, we'll talk about it later. But it has me wondering some other things. So that was really good. I don't think I actually have a least favorite part of this. There's nothing that really stands out to me as something that I didn't like about this section. So you give me your petty one. Did Tress brush her hair?
Just assuming I have pettiness in me. Yes. Well, I'm actually going to start with my favorite thing, too, because I need a minute to think about if I do actually have something I didn't like in this section. It's a good section. My favorite part was actually probably the part where they get found out and Crow, like, terrorizes them, shoots them, destroys Fort's tablet.
Communicator device.
Yeah, communicator. Just because of how well written it was in the sense that it's like, it is such like a low moment.
Yeah.
Like I like feel in that moment, I'm like, oh, borderline all is lost, you know, like it was oddly satisfying for everything to go wrong. Maybe because kind of what we were talking about earlier, everything kind of goes right and things kind of just click into place. So it was super nice in a sad way for like everything to just go to pot, like right before they go down to see the dragon. Yeah, I don't know if I have something in this section that I didn't really enjoy. Yeah, I don't, no
complaints here.
No notes.
no notes.
I think for me, the conversation with the dragon was just the funniest thing. I love seeing like an extremely powerful but extremely evil person just turn ridiculous. And that's really what happens.
Yeah.
She just becomes so pathetic. And I loved just reading that and just laughing at the interaction. I think that the thing that bugged me was that the whole issue with all the stuff that Crow had destroyed was resolved so quickly. Like we never saw like Fort without his device, like trying to communicate. You didn't feel the pain of the loss because the loss was resolved so quickly.
Instantly. Yeah, that's a good point.
My favorite part was when she was experimenting with the spores and the flare gun. That she makes like 5 or 6 different
Prototypes?
Yeah, prototypes. Yeah, and her very first one, she's like getting ready to shoot it, and she shoots it, and it goes like a foot in front of her, and then falls to the ground. I love that because it just is hilarious to me that like that's relatable. Like we've all done something that just did not work. And then the added insult to injury that she gets caught up in the vines and they like grasp onto her. I think that's and she thinks that that's the time that her last fears of the verdant goes away. Like she messed up, but it didn't kill her. She got wrapped up in the vines, and as long as she is careful, that's the worst that they will ever do to her. Especially as she's starting to get this bond with them to control them a little bit. She gets wrapped up and she just starts laughing. And it's a really relatable moment because we've all had those times when something's really, really important. We're so caught up in how important it is, and then we fail. And rather than getting frustrated with it and getting angry, she takes it as a learning experience and she just laughs it off. It is incredibly humanizing moment for Tress, and that I kind of connected with a lot. My only pet peeve is that we were told what the dragon was doing at the bottom of the Spore Sea. He was looking for he was studying the ecological system at the bottom of the Spore Sea, and that just blew my mind that stuff lives there, and we never get to talk about it again. That's it.
We will.
Hopefully.
Yeah, my favorite part was saving the ship from the Crimson Sea. That was my very favorite part. My other little favorite part, though, is getting to hear the words Dragonsteel come out of Hoyt's mouth, which we didn't get to talk about. That was definitely like look at that. Like, that's totally like just a direct Easter egg. So that was very, very fun for me to read. And I didn't really have any issues either, but now I have the ones that you guys talked about. So thank you for like inheriting. Like I inherited them. So.
They were really good points.
Yeah. Oh, something else we haven't talked about that I really loved is the way the art changes at the headings of all the chapters.
Oh,
yes. Once we hit the Crimson Sea, it goes from the, beautiful vines to the red of the spores, the spikes.
Yes.
And I don't know, it gave it such a
It was a
tone
really nice
change.
touch.
It's so nice.
Yeah.
Yes, a tonal
Which I was
change.
waiting for something because the vines had grown up so big that we couldn't keep growing around it, And so I was like, what's he gonna do, or what are the artist gonna do next? And I loved that it reflected the new sea that we were in.
Did y'all notice that the
smart.
spikes also grow over time?
Yeah.
Like how
They
cool
grow
is
as
that?
well.
Yeah,
I
which the
didn't-
vines do as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't notice that the vines were growing until like 10 chapters in. Yeah, I just like, oh yeah, there's some
some
vines
things.
there, and then I'm like, wait a second, I'm pretty sure that is growing.
It gives the book a movement.
It
Like,
does.
Yeah.
It gives the
Yeah.
book a movement that's very similar, and it's kind of a cool touch.
And I
Very
love that the transition point is this very beautiful
Yeah.
art piece done by Howard Lyon, where it's going from the verdant to the crimson. I love that it's right on that page split. The next thing that we see is the the spikes coming in. I
Right,
love it so
because
much.
we've crossed over.
Yep.
Yeah.
Crossed that
Very,
threshold.
very satisfying. Thank you for joining us for the third episode of Brandon's Book Club. Join us next week where we will be wrapping things up. We're going to talk about part 6, as well as final thoughts, overall feelings about the book as a whole. So be sure to join us for that. And then we will also have a spoiler discussion dedicated for the entire Cosmere. So we will see you next week.